right, welcome back, everybody. I'm joined once again with Mr. Dr. Jim, and we are going to continue our series on the recent exchange between Dr. Jordan Peterson and Bishop Robert Barron. This will be part 3, and it will probably be the final part. I know that we've gotten requests to really focus on the section on the problem of pain, the problem of suffering in their conversation. But yeah, Jim, since our last one, do you have any opening thoughts or remarks in general about the?
No, I mean, in a lot of ways, like we'll have to just cut this off because this is one that never has to end.
Right.
You know, I mean, and just beyond these two guys, it's just like what they're talking about is the thing most needful now, right? Like it's a very interesting. Whatever you think about their positions, right? These are two people who are kind of hitting the nail on the head of where the discussion needs to lie on a number of fronts right now. So we'll never be done with this.
Yeah, I'm no, sorry. Finish your thought.
And also, I think we had talked about this off air. At some point, we just need to maybe just throw down and do a problem of pain, problem of suffering.
This could be it. So, I mean, there's so much to cover. There's so much to cover on this topic. I mean, it is notoriously vexed, right? And people,
the Pat Flynn podcast has not been canceled.
We have yet.
So there's and we're not that threatening yet. So
no. We do a lot of disrupting and dismantling, but we haven't done quite enough to get canceled. Yeah. So yeah, we will. We'll dive into the problem.
For us, it's over, man. Right? Because they right.
I know, yeah. I feel like we're pretty amenable, but you never know. Yeah. Folks, if you're tuning in live, give us your thoughts, comments. We'd love to engage as we move along here. Yeah, we're live, and I'll just recap real quick. Part 1, it was my solo episode, much more boring when Jim isn't around. But I talked. It was heavy metaphysics, natural law type of stuff. Then Jim came in with some really cool philosophy of mind stuff, and now this time we're going to take up the section on suffering. I know we both have a lot to say about this, and certainly for me, I've been deeply fascinated for many years with I mean, like, you have to take the problem of pain and problem of suffering seriously, especially if you're a theist, right? Because we have these commitments, right, that seem to be in superficial tension, like all good God, really screwed up world. Like, what's going on here, right? And then this is like this great project of reconciliation, and we'll try and work through some of that. For me, in terms of writing and publication, Jim, as you know, like there's two papers right now that I'm pretty excited about, and they really go to, I think, the core of I think the two biggest issues, right? Like, one of my papers is trying to advance a contemporary argument for God's existence, and another paper is trying to take down the biggest argument against God's existence, which is evil. Now, your background,
just found in the process, these are not really separable projects either.
That's why I felt like I had to do both, right?
Yeah. I think what's cool you've done here is you found deep connection in a way I think other people have not found yet between these two papers.
Well, thank you.
I'm excited about your papers, Pat. I'm very excited about your papers.
Yeah, so we can tease some of those out as we move along, but you have a special thing to say about this too, not just because you're trained in this tradition as well, but you're trained under somebody who is very significant on the problem of evil side, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you just want to say anything about that before we move in, right?
Yeah, so William Rowe was on my dissertation committee at Purdue when I studied there, and the more or less recently late William Rowe, and gosh, I had 3 graduate courses with Bill, and probably one of the most intellectually formative people in my life. Like certainly one of the best teachers I had. And he is, he in his time was like the dean of the atheist side of the problem of evil debate in Anglo-American philosophy. Yeah. So this is. This issue has been something, on my burner, going all the way back to when I first started graduate studies. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, the way I think about it now is like, I really, I mean, as we'll talk about, the problem of evil, I think, is not a philosophical problem. I think it's a theological mystery. And I've got arguments for that. Right. And however, mysteries are still, often extremely agitating, right? So I don't think it's, and there's really kind of like two problems of evil, and I know
honestly, if they're not agitating, then it's not a mystery. It's like you're dodging something.
right, and the problem of evil hits you on two different levels. One is it can hit you kind of as a philosopher, right? Like you're sitting at the desk and you're trying to do this project of reconciliation and this puzzle, so like the intellectual level, but also it just hits you in the experiential level, the emotional level. Like, I mean, evil, suffering, it afflicts all of us profoundly, traumatically, right? So even if you think you can resolve it philosophically, there's still just a practical every day I have to live with this side of it, right? And I just want to make sure that we're through this conversation, wherever it goes, that distinction is made clear, because sometimes when you do treatments of the problem of evil philosophically, they can seem very cold, abstract, unfeeling, and it can give off a bad impression to people who are, which is everybody, right? Who's dealing with it on a practical, everyday level, right?
All mortals deal with this. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's a great way to preface, Pat, is especially if you get into like if the way you deal with it is like kind of your Augustinian no pain, no gain theodicy kind of thing, right? You can miss the existential issue, right? That's in this, and this for me is I think the beauty of Eleanor Stump's later work,
I want to talk about that too.
There's two ways to frame this thing. There's this Franciscan way and this Dominican way, right? And we have to have them both. Yeah.
Right. Cool. Well, should we just play a clip here and then see where the conversation goes?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think this seemed to me the most relevant aspect of the conversation when the problem of evil comes up, because I mean, Peterson just kind of like just throws it out there in its general form. So let's
as a man who suffers, like it sounds like he suffers a great deal.
Right. So before this, in the video, he talks about how he is in chronic pain. So we won't see that, but I think it's important to understand. And I don't know his whole, story, but my understanding is that at least this past year or 2 years, he's gone through just immense suffering. I mean, I think his wife was diagnosed with cancer. He was in a medically induced coma, I think, to try and come off of various medications for his struggles with anxiety and depression. So the man has been through a terrible, terrible amount, right?
And still got the book out. This is a badass, man.
A badass, right? And I've seen people just take shots at him and be like, well, look at this guy giving advice and he's got to clean his own room. No, man, I think the fact that he's still here, still swinging after all of that.
That room is clean.
That really says something. So our prayers are definitely with him, right? You never want to see anybody suffer like that. All right, so let's play the clip. This is the end of Bishop Barron talking, and then Peterson will come in.
Theologically, would he have sent the Son if creation had not fallen? That's an interesting question.
Right. In fact, the valuable fall that laid the groundwork
right?
Yes, it's a remarkable idea.
It is indeed, but like Duns Scotus argued, the Franciscan medieval theologian, that God would have sent his Son even if we hadn't sinned. But that's another question.
Okay, so let's take that apart for just a sec so that people are clear about it. So the theory here is that there is something wrong with the structure of creation. That's its steepness and sin. And everyone has to ask if they believe that. And it seems to me that people do, is there's a sense that things aren't how they should be, that we're not how we could be, that something has gone astray and is continuing to go astray, which is a mystery in and of itself if it's a God-created world. It's like, well, why is that precisely?
Let's pause it right there, because that's it, right? That's the problem of evil in its most general form. Do you think it would be helpful, Jim, before we kind of dive into, I guess, the more experiential and phenomenological aspects of this, to just start to diffuse some of that tension?
Which like the tension between theism and evil, or
right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I? This might actually go in the exact opposite direction, but there's something that Peterson said there that really hit with something I've been working and thinking on just in the last week or so. Is that okay?
Oh yeah. By all means. Mm-hmm.
I think there's a at least at like a phenomenological level, there's a problem of evil, whatever your theological disposition is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think this actually dovetails with some things that I know that you take very seriously, Pat, is if you I recently taught the Terrence Malick film Thin Red Line in one of my classes, and there's a moment in that film where the narration raises this, like where does this great evil come from? Okay, like where, and it's couched in this just terrible scene of human on human cruelty, just going beyond any necessity whatsoever, right? And so it's not really looking at like naturally, it's looking like humans do these just awful things to each other, far beyond in what any kind of explanation can really be given of this, right?
Right.
And the narration in the film raises this issue, like why do we do that? Okay. And then interestingly in the film, it's juxtaposed to another narration raising a problem of love. Okay. So it seems that human beings have this ability to have like completely gratuitous love too, right? It's far beyond anything we can make any kind of like natural explanation of, right?
Right.
So like there's this evil that we do that just it goes far beyond anything we can give like an evolutionary explanation of. There's this love we do, right? And they're equally mysterious. Do you see that? Okay. But so here's where I think like the problem lies is the fact that we're aware that we're capable of the gratuitous love tells us we don't have to do the gratuitous evil, right?
Right.
There's just other possibilities. It's always before us. This other way, I might say, right? This other way that we could go, but we just don't do it. We just don't do it, right? And there's something about us that is just off, right? And I mean off like in a kind of a directional sense. Like we know where we should be going,
Yeah.
but we don't do it, right? Okay. As for me, I think, and so like there is a sense that the whole damn thing, right? The whole human project is guilty of something, right? There was this other possibility that we could have taken that we haven't taken.
Yes.
Right? And both as a species and as each individual of us, right? Okay. And for me, that is the closest I can get to making sense of the notion of original sin.
Yes.
Right? That there's just this, like, Schopenhauer has this. He calls it the fault of existence, right? You're kind of guilty by showing up in the first place. Right? And Heidegger has this like this phenomenological kind of secularized guilt that we all carry in virtue of showing up. And like all of us are participating in some kind of really gratuitous evil just by showing up. But we know, because we've witnessed real love, that it doesn't have to be this way, but yet we keep doing it. And why is it that we're in a structural reality that lends us to this other nasty possibility constantly, right? And I think whether you're an atheist or theist, that should trouble you. That like this is a great mystery, right? And I think St. Paul covers it. The things I hate, I keep doing them, and the things I love, I don't do them.
Amen, man. Yeah, that's the truth.
That is the problem of evil to me. And then when you throw in like an omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly good God tolerating that, now it's gotten worse, right? But I think even if you don't go for that, there's still this deep mystery, like why can't we just pull the trigger and do the right thing? Right.
Okay, well, all right.
Explain that.
Yeah. Well, let's start to diffuse tension, because I think this is such an important way. So let me throw out as I've thought about this, for every day for many years, because like I don't think that the problem of evil like nips at you at least daily. Like are you even paying attention to life, right? Just it's something that deserves to be taken very seriously and patiently. But what my position at this point is that it's in superficial tension with theism, but only superficial tension, right? And when we think about this very deeply, I think we can flip it, right? I think we can show that actually, no, the problem of evil, when properly considered, actually is better evidence for theism than atheism. And we can kind of take a soft approach to this. We don't have to say, like a hard line moral argument, without God, there would be no objective moral values or duties or anything like that. Now, I think that's true, but I think we can soften the argument just to make it more just accessible, right? And the way that I would think about it is this, right? If the problem of evil is itself a problem, and this is apart from kind of my PSR stuff, it's contingent upon other things that stand in need of an explanation, right? The problem of evil is contingent upon something like having a moral standard. It's contingent upon rational conscious agents that can have conversations like this, right? And then we can ask, like, what worldview actually better predicts or explains the problem of evil? And if we have a naturalistic hypothesis, and you think that we just have shapes and motions, right, broadly considered, right? what are the chances that we're going to have the pieces in place to make intelligible sense of the judgments that we make, that something really has gone wrong, right? Where from that worldview are we going to get things like a moral standard, right? Where in that worldview do we get not just moral agents, but moral communities, right? Who can have conversations like these? And maybe it's possible. Maybe I'm saying, like, personally, I don't think it is possible. I think it's impossible to traverse those categories, right? But just say it's possible. It just seems, it's just so less probable on that worldview than it is on theism, because at least classical theism, like, that guarantees a moral standard. And then it's not hard to think that God might have reasons for bringing moral communities into existence, right? And that, of course, all your various theodicies, that he might permit a sort of range of moral autonomy, perhaps even a great range. So when you think about it like that, what's in superficial tension when more deeply considered, that the problem of evil, if it is going to even be formulated as a problem, is contingent upon other aspects of reality that are better explained and predicted by theism, that data point itself, that there is a problem of evil, actually is greater confirmatory weight of a theistic hypothesis than any naturalistic hypothesis, whether you're a reductionist or a Platonist or anything like that. That, to me, is the way to, I think, to start thinking about it in a cold, unfeeling, abstract way, right? Yeah. Where you can really, I think, flip it and see, no, actually what points initially away upon deeper consideration actually points back towards. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm just a lot more sanguine about being able to give a naturalistic account of the development of, like, moral community than you are, right? You know what I mean? So that doesn't seem so implausible to me, right? Now, if what you mean, though, is absolute moral, standards that would transcend any possible community interest or something like that, well, yeah, then I agree with you on that.
That's part of the picture, right? It's not just moral communities. That's one data point, but it's also moral communities and some moral standard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do I think you can give an account that you would have very smart apes that would be primarily oriented towards social cognition as their main, like, adaptive trait, and then who would thereby develop certain kinds of, like, shared sense of self-interest, stuff like that? I think that's perfectly plausible. I think that happened, right?
Mm-hmm. But you think it happened on a theistic worldview? That's the key, right?
Yeah.
Would you? So this is where it's, and I know you confess to having more materialist leanings than most theists, right? Yeah. So I guess I don't know how much we're in harmony or convergence there, but if it is just shapes and motions, speaking broadly, like a true reduction, hardball physicalism, like I don't see even those apes coming about. I don't. Right. I just think we have. I think we have a huge construction problem. Right.
I think there's a lot of stops for a naturalist before that.
Right? I agree. Like, the naturalists could, I think there, and this is where I want to say, naturalism is a big camp, right? So, like, I think the best you could do is, like, become like an Aristotelian or Platonic naturalist, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we can maybe explain more, but I still think whatever that ratio is, right? Is this more expected on a Platonic naturalism or theistic account? I think it's still going to weigh heavily of all those data points that I put out.
Yeah.
In the theistic hypothesis, right? So that's why I like taking the softer approach.
So
like,
if it's that there's an ordered universe, I agree with you. Okay.
Right.
If it's what happens once you've got an ordered universe up and running, there I think it's much. The naturalist is on much better grounds. Okay?
Yeah, but that's granting stuff.
You're not supposed to bracket the question of whether there's an ordered universe or not, right?
Right, and to me, you can't do that, and that's the point I'm making. Is, like, you can't consider the like just evil in isolation. Evil is contingent.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'm saying, right? It's contingent on an ordered universe, right? And in order for it to be a problem, in a sense, that something really does fail to meet our expectations, that there are standards. That we can make that judgment, which you talked about before. Like, how do we make sense of that judgment? If we can't make sense of that judgment, then there's no problem. Yeah. There's just a matter of fancy or preference, but it's not a real binding problem, right? So if we want to make it a problem, we have to make sense of that judgment. To make sense of that judgment, we have to consider all upon which that judgment is contingent. And it's that collection of things, which I'm saying theism better predicts and explains by an enormous margin than any naturalistic hypothesis, while leaving open that maybe naturalism does have resources to explain it, leaving that open. But I think that those resources are far less adequate than the theistic resources, right?
I guess, a question for me is always, okay, so what is it that the naturalist has to explain, right? Does the naturalist have to explain that there are such moral standards, or does the naturalist have to explain that we are such that we think there are such moral standards?
I think if they're going to make the problem of evil a true problem for theism, it has to be the former, right? And I think that more naturalists have realized this, right? Which is why you see among some of them shifting, they become more friendly with the forms. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think they see that as a resource to try and make sense of these objectively binding standards, not just that we have an illusion of that, right? I'm thinking of people like Wielenberg and those guys.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I'm trying to figure out, so if what you're saying is the naturalist, right? I'd even prefer atheist, right? If the atheist is saying, the atheist position in the problem of evil, in generically construed, right, presupposes a kind of objectivity of moral judgment, or at least the way they're construing it presupposes an objectivity of moral judgment, right? That would be unavailable to an atheist. Yeah,
right.
That I can agree with. Yeah, right. But I am less tied to the notion that you need theism in your back pocket to have moral judgment, right? Does that make sense?
It does. It does initially, but I think to cash out the intelligibility of that moral judgment, I would say you're going to have to get to theism eventually, right? Because like, you know me, I'm like exceedingly Aristotelian, right? So I think we can do a lot of work without bringing God initially into the picture.
Right.
But I think to fully cash out the intelligibility and to keep that judgment binding and objective in a sense, I do think you're going to need a theistic framework or support. What do you think of that?
Where do you think Aristotle brings in theism in moral judgment?
I don't think he does.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think he does. But I think that's a cost to Aristotle, right? I think his picture is inadequate in that sense, and I think that's where a Thomism or a Scholasticism kind of like fills in those gaps.
Right.
Yeah. So this is good. This is why I like having Jim on here, because he doesn't let you just get away with stuff. It's a good professor. Right. And he's testing my Aristotle too. No, you're right. Like, I don't think Aristotle does that. He doesn't I don't think, fill out all the metaphysics to cash out the full intelligibility of the judgment. Right. But he shows that we can make the judgment. Right. And we do make the judgment apart from just always having God like on the top of our minds. Right.
I just wonder if we would mean the same thing. Like I wouldn't use the word moral judgment in reference to Aristotle.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's a distinction between morality and ethics that's made that would have been like very foreign to Aristotle, right? Or he would have asked for a distinction to be made, right? I think for him, the idea that there's such a thing as a kind of moral obligation that's like untied, right? To, a much narrower account of human interests, right? Than I think like most like contemporary natural law people would be comfortable with, right? I think would be very fun to him. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I think where it will come in is if you want to make sense of a generally natural law perspective, right? I actually talked about this in part one a good bit. So this would be repeat. And then you need to make sense.
I think you have to do this for you to problem evil. I think you're right.
I think right. And then if you want to make sense of not just why is that binding, like really binding in a sense. And I know people push back, but I think you kind of do need. I don't want to throw that out there yet, but I don't want to open that hole yet. I'll pause on the immortal soul question, right? Because that's a great aspect in the ethics debate. Like, do you need not just a soul, but an immortal soul on the scene, right? And I go back and forth on that, but personally, but I think you're right to make sense of intelligible forms, right? Things that have not just an essence, but are directed consistently at an effect or range of effects. I think you do need an organizing intelligence to make sense of that. Now, this isn't for people who are unfamiliar with this stuff. This isn't intelligent design. Like, we can just start with an electron and make the argument, right? It doesn't have to have to do with any complex structures or anything like that. It's just that it really seems to be, in order to make sense of that first organizing principle of any limited finite being that is consistently directed to an effect or range of effects, we need some higher capability of conception, right? And that traditionally is cashed out, right, in the mind of God, right? But it's done in that God is the ultimate giver of the being to those things, right? So it's like it is a moral argument, but it's really more of a metaphysical argument that makes sense of a lot of how Aristotle, I think, would think about it. That's certainly compatible with him, but Aristotle doesn't make all those moves or connect all those dots.
This is something that people miss in Aristotle a lot. Is he calls God the first moving cause, okay, but God doesn't move things, but for Aristotle, by acting on them, right? The first cause for Aristotle moves the universe because the universe loves it.
It's attracted. It's an attracting cause, right?
Yeah, it's an attracting cause. Now, you wouldn't say God designed the universe, right? You know what I mean? But the idea, like, I think this I can't remember if you mentioned the show or not, but John Leslie has this view that really every first cause argument comes down to a moral argument for God's existence, right? That he thinks he just cannot. We're not really satisfied with ordinary causal explanations. Ultimately, we're looking for a moral argument, right? An explanation in terms of what is best, right? And that the question of why is there something rather than nothing is unsatisfied until we can see that it's better that what there is be than it not be. And he traces it back to Plato's Phaedo, where Plato says, all these other people promised me an explanation of the universe in terms of mind, but if it explained in mind, it should be explained in terms of what's best, and they've never explained it in that, right? And so, on Leslie's view, like the whole history of cosmological arguments is this looking for an explanation of the best, and that is implicitly to say, I'm looking for an explanation of good and evil here, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it becomes eminently more practical, right? I want to know why the hell this trip through this seemingly pretty rough place that is the universe, right, is worth the run, right?
Well, 100%, right? And that's where, like, I think
is the point you're making,
right? Especially with the immortal soul, right? Like, it does seem really good for me to or in general, right? Yeah. Like when the Marine jumps on the grenade for his friends and is blown into a million different pieces, right? We think that is such a gratuitous act of love and that something supremely good has happened. But we anticipate, right, at least implicitly, that there is going to be some sort of reconciliation there, right? Now, Christianity has the resources for that. There will be, right? Mm-hmm. It does seem a little unsatisfying, right? Or it would give someone pause to think if he just got blown to a million pieces and that's just the complete end of him, right? I'm not going to say that it's still not a good act if the immortal soul isn't online, but the immortal soul gives a note to that picture that is encouraging and helpful. I at least want to say that much. You know what I mean? Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So I don't know. Do you want to play some more clips? And
yeah.
Or did you have any further thoughts on everything so far?
No, let's do it because I want to bring up Dostoevsky at some point here too. So
yeah. There was one more thing. Yeah, let me just reiterate what I'm saying about, I guess, the way I'm approaching the problem of evil is I'm saying that the tension is superficial. We can even grant that an atheist or naturalist might have some explanatory resources on hand, but when we think about it deeply, hypothesis theism actually is a better explanation, right? And that's all I want to say, because that's all you need to say to start to diffusing the tension, right?
Not a better explanation that there is evil, but it's a better explanation, in your view, that we're in a universe where there are beings who can recognize that there is evil.
That, and I also want to say this is like, if I just consider theism in the abstract, and so it's like, what's the chances that it's a prediction issue, right? Because what the problem of evil really says is that given theism, it predicts not evil, right? That's what the problem of evil says. There's an over prediction problem. Perfect God, we predict perfect world. And I think that's false, right? I don't.
Atheists have for a long time too,
right? And because I think there's an important distinction between a perfect being and a perfect world. I'm still not sold. Maybe there's a perfect world if you want to follow Leibniz and stuff like that, right? But certainly you can draw a distinction between perfect beings and worlds, right? But also I want to stay neutral on that and say, like, I don't know what the probability is that, again, considering the abstract, that God would create an imperfect world, right? But to make sense of an imperfect world and the judgment that it's an imperfect world is better explained by a theistic hypothesis than a naturalistic hypothesis, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right.
Is that clarifying? I hope not just to the gentle listeners.
It still means I think that's a very good way to approach the logical problem of evil, right?
Yeah,
we've got a gratuity problem now.
Right. Indeed, we do. Right. So this is your man, Bill Rowe.
And my view on that is, like, the poor you will always have with you. Right.
Right.
Right. Like, the way I've always seen this is, if you solve the logical problem of evil, right, it's always possible then that there's an explanation for why there's so much.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so I can always fall back on, for all we know, there's a reason here, right? You see my point?
Of course,
And so once you've done that, it seems to me the gratuity problem, however uncomfortable it is, and uncomfortable is a bad word, however horrid it is, right?
Right, yeah.
It goes away, because, like, we're saying, well, for all we know, there's an explanation. We would expect there to be explanations that God doesn't, that knows that we don't, right? So it seems to me now it
evaporates.
It doesn't satisfy, but I think it's enough to say I'm not crazy to persist believing in God in light of this.
Exactly. And so for people who aren't clear, right, we have the logical problem of evil, which is a very strong form. It just says that there's a strict logical incompatibility between an omnibenevolent, omnipotent being and essentially the world we see, right? And that's been kind of tossed into the philosophical dustbin. You see it get attempted revivals every now and then, right? But it's like in like philosophical progress actually does happen sometimes. And it seems like this is one of those areas where both theists and atheists have kind of moved away from that a little bit. But then Bill Rowe, who you mentioned, he's advanced this evidential problem of evil, where he says, okay, we'll put the logical problem aside. Just look at how bad the world is, right? Look at any instance of evil or the sheer cumulative weight of it. And, like, you tell me that that's the type of world that we would expect with theism. And then the term gratuitous evils comes about. And I think you nailed it, right? Gratuitous has always struck me as question begging. I like the term mysterious evils, where there's evils where it's very hard for us to see, like, what could possibly be the reason for this. However, I want to just echo your point on a theistic hypothesis. It's mystery and stuff like that actually is not unexpected. It's to be expected, right? God, omnipotent, omniscient. It's to be expected that God would probably have God-sized reasons that our finite minds just do not comprehend. And as long as that's on the table and to be expected, there's nothing cheap in terms of a response of saying what you said. So I'm saying, like, there's a principled Mysterianism here on offer for theism to respond. And I think you've said it brilliantly, that shows, no, like, even if I can't explain this, even if I don't see any of the reasons, here's a way to put it. Just because I don't see a reason for it doesn't mean that I see there is no reason for it. Yeah. And that's it, right?
Now, have you read Brian Davies on this?
Yeah. So I like, So Davies is good, but I don't know if I part ways with him a little bit on certain areas.
He's an interesting cat, right? Okay. But Davies, and this is an argument I find troubling in the good way. He'll say, look, he doesn't like this kind of skeptical theism that I'm pushing here, right? And on Tuesdays I don't like it, but Thursdays I do. So here we are. Okay, so Davies, I think it's Davies, will say, look, if you go this route and you say, well, for all we know, there could be justification for this, and because we've solved the logical problem of evil, like we're basically like arguing from a negative here, right? So we know the fact that there's evil doesn't rule out God, and so then the fact that there's evil doesn't rule out God has reasons for evil, and then for all we know now, there's some connection between this evil and some great good, right? Davies is gonna. I think it's Davies is gonna argue. Say, look, you've now said we could be so wrong as to what the connections between goods and evils are, or what the goods are, that you're invoking a kind of moral skepticism that I think like the Pats and the Jims of the world would be uncomfortable with, right? That it seems like you're saying we could be just globally wrong as to what the good is, right? And if you admit that and admit it's like probabilistically weighty enough that we can, use it in this case, then it looks like you're stuck with a really nasty moral skepticism now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Uh-huh.
And I'm not sure I know how to fully answer that.
So I say that I'm not a skeptical theist. I think we need at most a soft skepticism, right?
Yeah.
And there's certainly some threshold that could be crossed, that like the one world with like one burning baby in it for all eternity. Like if that was the world we found ourselves in, I'd be like, okay, I give up, right?
I mean,
yeah, there's just, but that isn't the world that we find ourselves in, right? And
that's why for me it's important to see there's a problem of evil, but there's a problem of love too, man.
100%, right?
Okay,
And,
you know what I mean? Like that. That's why I think that moment in the Malik film is so important, right? It's like there is a problem. Like why the hell? But why the hell this too? Like why? This is. I saw an interesting, just a couple-minute video of Jocko Willink talking about theism.
oh yeah, really?
Yeah.
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I kind of expected Jocko to be like non-committal, right? But he said, no, man, I've seen people do stuff that it doesn't make any sense that they would do that as like something charitable without explaining that in terms of theism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's it. There's a problem of love. Now, there's a man who's seen the problem of evil too, right?
Up close, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Right. He's wiped it off his hands when he was done, right?
Right.
But he sees there's a problem of love too, right? And so I guess this is, I think, and that's relevant to what we were actually talking about. Sorry, but we're not in the universe where it's no better than a burning kitten.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And prima facie, why wouldn't we think we were in that one either? Right. Of all the ways it could go, why we always ask, of all the ways it could go, why is it going this badly? I think you could also ask, of all the ways it could have gone, why is it going this well?
Yes.
There's
right.
Assumption that like the amount of evil in the world outweighs the amount of good.
Yeah. Right.
Now, maybe for me as like a pampered middle class 21st century academic, it's easy for me to say that. Okay. Do you know what I mean? But really, when you walk around the world, like just think of, is it really this good assessment that somehow it's so bad we can't imagine why anybody would want this world to be, right?
Right.
Like once you get over like the fact that it's unfair that we die,
mm-hmm.
right? Once you've done that, then I want to really where is the default probability set here, right? Do you see what I mean?
I do. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's at least as likely as mysterious that there's this much love as there's this much evil.
Yeah. So the problem of evil has to at least be considered in relation to the problem of love. I think that's a great point. I want to say just two more things and we'll get back to Peterson. But this is good. We wanted to have this conversation anyways. Davis is important because he reminds us, we always need this reminder in the tradition of classical theism that God is not, and people get uncomfortable with this, he's not a moral agent like we are moral agents.
Yeah, I love that, by the way.
And that's absolutely correct, because what is the moral obligations we have flow from our having a human nature, right? And what perfects human nature. God explodes those limits. He doesn't have a human nature, right? So like, if we think that we can...
Burning kitten universe, would he have done something wrong?
Well, here's the thing. No, the reason God didn't make a burning kitten universe isn't because God has a moral obligation not to do that. It's because God is all wise.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I kind of push a little bit back against Davies, and like everything you say is correct. Like we can't try and indict God of like lacking certain virtues that humans would have in certain situations. That's true. However, and this is to avoid the hard line skepticism, we can still have reasonable moral expectations of God. And they might be blurry where those lines are, but we can have real moral like I can have at least strong moral expectations that God would have just create one universe where it's just a burning kitten for all, because it's senseless, right? It's utterly nonsense, right?
Yeah. This is where I go with this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that I think you're saying the same thing. Is I'm not sure that the burning kitten universe is a possible world. I
don't think it is.
It's unintelligible.
Exactly.
Right? Unless you have what I think is a really facile view of possibility, just not implying contradiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
I probably think there's a lot fewer possible worlds than most like philosophers do, right?
I'm with you. Mm-hmm.
And so I think God wouldn't do that like make a universe where there's a burning kitten. Not because God has an obligation not to do that. It's just that such a world will be unintelligible, and,
Exactly.
and unintelligibility can't occur. You see that, right? Right. And so if we were in a universe that was utterly unintelligible, like once again, that's my counterexample to theism, not in a universe where like lots of bad shit happens.
But it's just radically unintelligible. And we live in an intelligible universe.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah, that's we're in complete agreement on that point,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And I think that's how you avoid like the really harder skepticism, is by admitting, no, we can still have expectations of God, but it's going to be flowing not from putting moral constraints around God that we have with a human nature. That isn't going to apply. Davis is 100% right there, but understanding that God isn't in the business of creating nonsense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to say is just, when weighing the problem of good to the problem of love, I'm sorry, the problem of evil to the problem of love, is that it is important to understand. I think this is right, where the good is ontologically more fundamental. There is an asymmetry there, right? We can't make sense of the bad except as being parasitic, right? Right.
Yeah.
There's a clear ontological asymmetry. So whatever else the case is, it is clear metaphysically that good is more fundamental. Whatever the most fundamental aspect of reality is, it's good, because the bad is something that has fallen away, become disordered, is eating away from, taking bites out of the good.
And it's because it's against the backdrop of intelligibility.
Yes. Yeah. Right. 100%. Right. So there's a lot of resources here, privation theories, essences, all this stuff that I think we're just kind of like planting the seeds of how I think the tradition has thought about it.
This is important for me in that, like I don't really arrive at God by like an inference anymore. Okay. I'm not saying that there aren't such inferences to be made. It's just that sort of things become less important to me. Right.
Right.
For me, it's like, whoa, universe is intelligible. Okay. It's like this, it's this undeniable datum. The universe is intelligible, right? Okay, and that doesn't seem like that had to be the case.
But that's Lonergan's argument, right?
Exactly.
Lonergan's argument is if reality is intelligible, God exists. It's intelligible. God exists, right? That's his grand. I mean, it's far more complex than that when he unpacks the details. Like, that's his book Insight, but that is his essential argument, is intelligibility, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's get back to the clips here. I need to pull this back up. Thank you, Peterson, for watching.
Yes, yeah. This is the good thing about podcasts, right? You can't really control it.
Exactly.
As we learned yesterday.
Well, the quick answer is corrupted freedom, or a misguided freedom, you might say. But the word comes into flesh, into fallen flesh, and the cross is what? The cross is cruelty and hatred and violence and institutional injustice and stupidity. And if you read the Passion narratives, it's a beautiful sort of poetic presentation of all that's wrong with us that comes out to meet him. And bearing all of that, he continues in his relationship of obedience and unity with the Father. So bearing the sins of the world, bearing all the dysfunction and twisted quality of the world, he brings us back online. So in the attitude of the Word made flesh on the cross, we see a sinful, corrupt, hate-filled world now brought painfully back online. That's the sacrifice of the cross that's pleasing to the Father. So we should never play the game of, well, the Father is a dysfunctional alcoholic father that is now demanding this blood sacrifice. It's rather the Father is pleased by the Son's entry into our fallen situation and his bearing of all that dysfunction, even as he brings us back online to the Father.
Okay, so let's say Christ maintains his, I know this isn't exactly the right way of thinking about it, but it'll work for.
Did we want to say anything about Barron's responses at this point? Because there's two big things there, right? Is he brings up the notoriously vexed issue of freedom, right? Free will. And second is he starts to hint at different theories of the atonement. And I know that I'm a huge fan of Stump's latest work. I mean, I'm a big fan of Stump's book, Atonement. Have you read that one?
Yeah. No, the atonement one, no.
Yeah. And I think it's important to get that right, is that for people who are unfamiliar, here's a quick sketch, right? You have these different theories of the atonement, but you essentially have satisfaction theories and substitution theories, right? In like the broad strokes, right? And one theory, but the issue is this, right? So the problem is here's the problem. How do we reconcile with God? Something's happened, right? Something broke. We can talk about what that is. And now we have this need of reconciliation. What is stopping that reconciliation? Or on what side is that reconciliation thwarted? Is it on God's side? Is it something about God's nature, like God's justice or honor, that just stops him from just forgiving us, right? For whatever this offense was, right? And that there really has to be some debt paid, right? And this is the idea where Christ really stands in as a penal substitute and pays some sort of debt on our behalf to enact this reconciliation. So that would say the problem's on God's side. The other theory, however, this is Stump's, says, no, God could forgive us. That's not an issue, right? The problem is on our side, in our metaphysical fallibility of opening us up to God's love, of overcoming our tendency to sinfulness, ego-centeredness, pride, or this or that. So what has to happen is there has to be something, the remedy has to be in us. The cure has to be in us. And this is Stump's account of mutual indwelling, that Christ on the cross is the best and most befitting way for God to show his radical love for us, to take on our sins, not in a penal substitutionary way, but to open his psyche to all of the suffering. Like when we say he takes on all the sins, like he takes it on in a massively psychological way. And so the idea of the atonement on this model is that it both gets God into man, gets us to resist to the point of justification, right? To see God's radical transcendent love on the cross. Because, a lot of us, we're angry. We want to shake our fist at God, right? But then when God's naked on a cross, it's kind of hard to shake your fist at that without feeling like a pretty big jerk, right? Opens us up, but then also gets man into God, of the mutual indwelling, of the taking on all the sins. And so this is why this was the most befitting way. Certainly Stump and Aquinas don't want to say, as comes up later in this conversation, that it had to happen this way or that God would have done it this way absent the need for reconciliation. But this was the wisest and most befitting way for it to occur. So I obviously, you can probably see which way I lean. I like Stump's way of thinking about it. I think it speaks more to the important.
As soon as we say befitting, who is it? It's Balthazar will say, you've gone aesthetic there, right? Mm-hmm. It's become a question of this is a really beautiful way to pull it off, right? There would have been something lacking aesthetically if you hadn't done it. Something like this, right?
Right.
But that's not. No one's obligated to be beautiful, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. These kinds of issues, I'll admit, I studiously avoid. Okay. Just because I don't really even know what to make of the language at this point. Like we've gone so metaphorical, right? But not right. I think the thing that's helped me the most in this ever was Father Neuhaus of First Things fame. I remember reading something he wrote. I can't remember where it was, where he said, he was talking about, the penal model and how that looked. It just seems like we've evolved past that somehow, right? Okay.
Yeah, Stump's very strong. She says that is incompatible with a God of love. I mean, she rejects it outright, the penal substitutionary model. Mm-hmm.
And Neuhaus said, but if God, and like Stump, and God could forgive us. He could just say,
snap the proverbial fingers, right? Mm-hmm.
Little creatures, But that would be a failure to take us seriously, is the way Neuhaus put it, right? And if you think of it, think of Aristotle's virtue of magnanimity. Okay, like the magnanimous man is generous to people because he's so awesome, right? Like I can let you have that because you're no threat to me, little slave, right? Mm-hmm. Please, or the idea, like think of like the Greek notion of being magnanimous after the battle to those you vanquished, right? Well, yeah, we can grant you concessions because we've shown that you're our lesser now, and no sense in dragging this out any longer, right? It's always from a standpoint of superiority, right? Did you see that? And
right.
It's a lot of times forgiveness in the wrong sense can be from a sense of your superiority to someone else affords you the occasion of forgiveness,
right? And not sort of not wanting to be botheredness.
Yeah. Like I couldn't, for me to be bothered with your little foibles even if they offend me, would be below my high station.
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
And the idea of like not just a God of forgiveness, but like forgiveness in the Christian sense, like forgiveness, like not only do I choose to forget how bad you are, but I'll even share with you in the consequences of the bad you've done. Right? Do you see that? That's like unintelligible to the Greek mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's why, like, you know, it's part of the scandal of the cross, right? And so the idea now that you've got this God, like, if you like the fact that God is going to do something about this, right? Demand something from us, demand something from himself for this, is this incredible act of humility on God's part, right? Do you see that? Okay, which is that an explanation? Okay, fair enough. I don't do this sort of thing, but that to me is very aesthetically pleasing. Right?
I completely agree. It has
very aesthetically pleasing.
It has a ring of beauty that itself winks toward the truth, right?
Yes.
And I think, like, if all else is equal in terms of like
piece of art, and I will look at that.
Yeah, right, which makes sense because this fits well with the theory of it's about breaking down something that needs to be broken down within us, right? Yeah. To stop this resisting so God can begin his work of regeneration, right? And Stump's got, she's brilliant on the metaphysics, right? Because she talks about how God works on the will via efficient versus formal causality and how justification. So if you want like the deep, detailed metaphysics of that ties into the theory of atonement, just get Stump's Aquinas, Wandering in Darkness, and Atonement. Just get that whole series. I promise you'll be deeply satisfied with the technical display there. But I love what you say, Jim. Mm-hmm.
To me, it's the difference between saying, yeah, I can afford your sins because you're pretty inconsequential, to saying, damn it, you could be better. But I know you can't do it on your own at this point, so I'm going to do something to get you there.
And what sounds more like a loving parent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't suffer my children's sins because they're my lessers. Like, oh, you know, Cormac, I can tolerate you doing that because you're a stupid kid and you're my lesser, right? Mm-hmm. No, I'm gonna forgive you, but then I'm gonna like help you with this thing, right?
Right.
I'm gonna stick with you on this. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you bring this up too, and I know we've talked about this before, but the befittingness, the beauty, right? And to me, this has been like a sort of symmetry breaker, right? Like if things are like otherwise equal in argumentative force, I do look towards what's more beautiful.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I do. And I don't think that's illegitimate, right? And now I don't think they're
look, Kant agrees with you. Mm-hmm. Like for Kant, beauty's the big deal. It's like the big tiebreaker, right? You know, in a very complicated, please, gentle listener, I'm simplifying. Maybe we'll do an episode of this sometime. But I'm simplifying. But for Kant, beauty it's the tiebreaker.
Right. Yeah. And let me be clear. Like, I don't think that there's a perfect symmetry between theories of atonement here. Like, I think one wins out on independent grounds and it's more beautiful. But even if they were perfectly equal, I would go with one just because it's so much more beautiful.
But see, in my middle age, I've become this like continental mush head, and I only care about it. So
you're done pushing around symbols. Now you're just
I've done it. Yeah, I've done it.
Good stuff.
Right.
Let's keep going here.
For rhetorical purposes, I think it's so Christ is tortured by betrayal, by physically and spiritually as well, because the best way to torment someone is to punish them despite their innocence, right?
Yeah.
So right. Or maybe worse than that, to punish them because of their virtues. That's even better. And so that's intrinsic in the story as well. Christ bears up under that. He doesn't repudiate God, or doesn't repudiate his own essence. It's something like that. Then what is the example of that? Is the example of bearing up under that exceptional duress and maintaining a moral stance? Is that the example that redeems the world? Is it that if you do that in your own life, the world is de facto redeemed?
It is that, but more, because if it's just that, then a Pelagian system would be true, that we just need a good, moral exemplar. It's something more.
Well, a bit more than just merely good. I mean, it's superhuman, right, what's being asked for.
No, true, but it's something more metaphysical about it. It's a reworking of the way things are. If Jesus takes upon himself all the dysfunction of the world and swallows it up in the ever greater divine mercy, so it's Christ bearing all of our dysfunction, but transfiguring it in his great act of forgiveness and obedience to the Father. I think all of that coming together simultaneously is the sacrifice that's pleasing to the Father. In some ways, the word from the cross, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do, is the most important. Or play with this too, Jordan, that after the resurrection, so Jesus comes back precisely to those who had denied him and betrayed him and run from him in his moment of greatest need. And in almost any telling of a similar story, if that had all happened, and then the person who had died is back from the dead and he appears to those who had abandoned him, you'd expect him to, wreak havoc on them, right? So Jesus shows his wounds, to be sure, because the wounds of Jesus are a sign of the world's dysfunction. If I'm ever tempted, when we were younger, the book I'm Okay, You're Okay came out, right? And so we're always tempted to say, well, basically we're okay, just need a little fixing up around the edges. Whenever we're tempted to say that, it's the wounds of Jesus that say otherwise.
Yeah, well, that's why I was insisting earlier that I don't, that it isn't merely misguided good that turns people towards the darkness. It's voluntary desire to produce the darkness as well. Anyways, I do take that very seriously. And it's an interesting idea, is that the ideal is wounded in proportion to the degree that everything has deteriorated away from the ideal. And that's almost by definition true, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So there, I mean, he's getting at what we were saying, right? That whatever else evil or badness is, it's a woundedness of the good, right? Yeah. So he sort of gets it, like implicitly or not. I don't know how much reading he's done on the metaphysics side, but it's just always interesting to hear that. Mm-hmm.
There's something that Peterson he does it early in the podcast too, but it comes up there that he hints at that I think is for me one of the most interesting moments in first book, 12 Rules for Life, and I think it really kind of shows his Heideggerian cards too, because I think he's really talking about. Besides the footnote that I think I'm the only person who's read, but
I didn't catch that at first.
That's right, exactly. But I think he's really in a lot of ways talking about like Heidegger's notion of resoluteness, right? Which is a kind of secularized faith. Okay, so it's that you'll hear Peterson say this all the time is, I think he even uses the word faith. Like what faith is to act as though the world is meaningful when like all around you would tell you it's not, right? Mm-hmm. And he does it here, and he does it in other things I've heard him do. He'll even talk about like the cross that way. Like, what is it to take up the cross? It's like to go up the hill, right? And act as if there's some ultimate meaning to this, even though there's just no apparent sense that can be made of this, right? And if you're asking like, what does it mean like every day, right? To be a Christian, it's to act like that happened, like this guy died and he rose from the dead, and it's a true story, and to keep going. You see that, okay? And it's interesting, and Peterson's really careful. He's going to cut it out, and he's very carefully ambiguous at certain points.
Yeah, he's good at that.
Yeah, and he'll say, well, so I think this is what you should do. You should act as if, right? And the question is well, but is it though? Do you see that?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, and then Barron comes back here and he says, well, it's more than just act as if, because we're not saying we're making it so by doing it. We're saying God's making it so, and there's this deeper metaphysical story, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I agree. It's a kind of a corrective to the ambiguity that Peterson's doing there. But I want to say something kind of in favor of other, and not disagreeing here. It's not disagreeing.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. But I, as someone sitting here 2 millennia after the fact, right, knowing my own fallibilities, knowing all the problems that come with this, all I can do is act as if. Do you see what I mean? Like I can't jump over and get absolute some kind of certainty that this is what God is doing. Do you see what I mean? All I can do is act as if, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's one of the things I like about Peterson is he's kind of saying like, look, we don't have to pretend we have certainties we don't have. We just have to like do the thing.
Yeah. Now so I've never liked the especially when it comes to religious conversations, the idea, well, it gets difficult with the theological virtue of faith of how we think about certainty. But when we think about certainty in our sort of every, you know what I'm saying, right? Like
I can be given that certainty.
Yes, yeah. So
I don't do anything to get it.
Yeah. So, but like in the normal way that people think about certainty, I think that's not how we should be talking, right? At the same time, I resist Peterson's sort of blind faith, right? Because I think certainly with Barron, where he says that whatever else faith is, it's on the far side of reason, right? Like it's reasonable and responsible to accept this. Why? Well, there's lots of stuff that confirm it, right? We've got philosophical arguments, we've got historical evidence, we've got confirmatory signs, as the great Catholic tradition has said, right? We've got tradition. Like, it just seems like, if Catholicism is true, the world kind of like, that's kind of how the world looks, right? Like, if it was true, we might expect something like this. We see something like this. It's very reasonable. I just like the term reasonable and responsible, right? Like, because I think it's easy to get people to see that it's reasonable and responsible to accept this. Yeah. And then I think that's useful, because I think it's true, but it also doesn't like get people's hackles up, because at the same time, I'm not saying you absolutely have to accept this, and if you don't, you're a fool, right? Or that like this is how you can be 100% absolutely certain that this is true. And because I just don't think that that's how this game is played, and I don't think it's how the game should be played. I think there's a very reasonable case to be made, and I think once that case is made, faith comes in on the other side of that, right? But at the same time, I don't think you need to even make that case to have the faith too, right? That's the other side of it as well, right? Because faith is, at the end of the day, a theological infused virtue, right? Yeah. But it's something that can be extended from the reasonable and responsible case, that you don't have to just say, well, I just believe, and that's the end of it, right? So I agree. I think what we're trying to find here is like, I don't want to say a middle ground between Peterson and Barron, because I think Barron already has that middle ground. But it's this middle ground between the caricature that you often get in secular society, that whatever else faith is, it's just literally the definition that a lot of skeptics give is believing things without evidence, and that's ridiculous, right? Nobody ever has defined faith, a serious theologian or philosopher, in that sense. Like, that's just a straw man. On the other extreme, though, it's
even do that. Right.
Yeah, like not even Kierkegaard does that, right? Yeah. So like, yeah, sorry, Jerry Coyne or whoever wants to define it like that. That's just a horrible straw man. But the other thing is thinking that you need this sort of, apodictic certitude, right? That you've gotten through like demonstration.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so do you know who Jonathan Quanvig is?
No, never heard the name.
I might be mispronouncing the name, but he's when I saw him speak at the time, he was at Baylor. He's a religious epistemology kind of Plantinga. I don't mean to say he's just a Plantinga guy. I mean, he's his own guy, right?
But in the Reformed epistemology,
does that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because he's, I'd be lucky to be as much of a guy as him. Okay. Right? Okay. Right? So, but I saw him give kind of a more informal lecture once, and this is not a guy I would normally agree a whole lot on, right? But where he defined faith as not having side bets.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I thought it was really cool. Because what he said is like, let's say you're betting on a football game, right? Mm-hmm. We would not do that here on the Pat Flynn Show, but and if the savvy gambler doesn't put all his money on the big one, right? He spreads it out on some other things, so that if he loses the big one, he still can fall back into something. He's still got a stake for next week, right?
Right.
And he said, look, like if you get married and you've got a side bet, like there's another option you still entertain. Okay. You're not really married.
That's not being faithful, right?
That's not being faithful, right? That's not commitment, right? Mm-hmm. You see that? Like, it's not commitment. Now, that doesn't mean like you go into marriage like completely just without considering this, right? But once you've considered it and you've made the judgment, I think this is, and I can't be sure this is the right girl. You can't be, right?
Right. I can't be sure that she's not going to poison my breakfast tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the right girl. Okay. As far as I can tell, in my limited fallible judgment, and trust me, you don't really know until you've been married for 10 years, right? In my limited fallible judgment, this is the best I can do in terms of like, I think this is the right one. Okay. So your initial judgment is tentative, but once you've made it, you're like, damn it, that's it. I'm not entertained. I throw out the girlfriend's phone numbers now, right? Fonzie's little black book gets thrown out. I'm not keeping that around because I'm committed to this. Even though I admit, although I had some good reasons for it, my commitment to it far outstrips those reasons now.
Right.
And I'm not entertaining other options.
I love that. Yeah.
What's religious faith then? Okay, well, it's not having side bets on worldviews, right? It's like, okay, I admit, like, say this overall Christian worldview, it's got enough probability behind it to say that I'm not just batshit crazy to go in for it. you know what I mean? But although I admit I could be wrong, but now I've committed to this thing, and I'm not entertaining these other options.
Right.
There's something, you see that.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. And I think this is where like the contemporary, actually, Pascal's wagers could be helpful. Like Michael Rhoda's got some really good stuff on this. And the idea is it doesn't do away with doing as much rational adjudication as you can. So what Rhoda will say is like, the way Pascal's wager should be understood is you begin the investigation. You look at the philosophical cases for God. You look at the historical credence for various religions and say you do all that, right? You take reason as far as it can. And then you're like at a position where you think like 50-50, it's Christianity or atheism, right? Like say you get yourself to that point, reason, like, and that's as far as you get, right? Then what Rhoda will say is like, once you've done that reasoning process,
Susan or Linda, they're both great.
Right. Once you've done that reasoning process, well, then there's other symmetry breakers. And that is, what do you have to stand to gain versus lose? And Rhoda will say, well, you've got traditional Pascalian type of stuff. It's like, if you believe in, you trust yourself, if you make this commitment fully and you're right, you have eternity to gain and pretty much nothing to lose. And, vice versa, people are probably familiar with the traditional one, but Rhoda's good because he brings in all the contemporary research too, sociological research, which just shows that people who live a religiously devoted life tend to be happier, more fulfilled, less anxious, less depressed. Like they tend, like even in all like the secular measures of what a good life or a happy life is, it's better to make that commitment. Right. Because previously pushback against Pascal's wager used to say
ambiguous on which way the causal arrow goes there on that one. I've looked at this a little bit, but
chime in.
Tend to be religious. It's not just that.
Maybe. Yeah.
But that's part of the point. It's ambiguous, right?
I guess I would say I haven't looked as too deeply into all those studies. Rhoda might address that in his book. I forget. But I'll just say from experience, becoming religious, right, helped a lot with a lot of those issues for me, right? But that's not, why would that be surprising, right? Like it eases a certain existential dread that I had with previous worldviews and stuff like that. So I'll just throw that note in there. But regardless aside, it eliminates one of the things that people would push back against with the original wager is like, well, you might be giving up a lot of goods in this life. And the best research we shows is that that's at least inconclusive, and maybe even probably you'll have a better this life. If you live a life, here's the key, not of faking belief, but Rhoda's very good about this, religious seeking, right? A sincere seeking. Because you don't want to just, you can't just fake believe something. Like, how could I just believe that I have a gold bar in my hand if I don't really, like, you can't even make sense of that. However, if you get yourself to a point of like epistemic stalemate, it then seems to make totally reasonable sense to just seek that out and decide, I'm going to commit in this direction of sincere seeking. What does that mean? I don't know. Do RCIA, join Bible groups, talk with people who have these beliefs, try and learn more, that sort of thing, right? So I just wanted to throw that on out there because I think it complements maybe some of what you were saying.
No, I agree. But I'll even say that even my side, part of what I said about this is this is all done from kind of an internalism about belief, right? That I'm really uncomfortable with, and I think that once we made that term, we're really screwed anyway. but that's always my stalking horse. So I'll just leave it aside.
Yeah.
If I'm never going to talk to anybody ever again about anything, I have to be able to put that aside, right? Right? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. All right. So we've probably got about like 10 more minutes here, Jim. Is there any? And we could do a part 4, but I don't know. Is there anything else about this conversation about the whole Peterson Barron thing that you want to?
One thing I just want to add, I think there's even places where Peterson brings this up is, in the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, which is, like maybe the greatest treatment of evil in Western history, right? Father Zazima, one of the really important characters in the novel, so you have the famous moment in the novel where Ivan goes off on the problem of evil, right? And he says, I'll give, the world's so bad, I'll give my ticket back. I'll give my ticket back, right? And it's interesting, Zazima's reply, the way it's structured, it's not like directly reply, the way the novel is structured, it's clear this is the return, okay? He doesn't give a theodicy, right? He connects his being with the being of everything in the universe, okay? Like his connection with everything in the universe. And he asks, what is my role in this sneaking suspicion that we have that things have not gone the way they have gone, right? So it's sort of like Zazima's approach is always, yeah, I agree. This doesn't all make sense, okay? But it doesn't make sense because I'm doing it too. And I'm connected to the whole world. The world has fallen, but it seems like the world's possibilities are my possibilities too. Not literally, okay, right? But the question is for Dostoevsky is like, what is my role in this evil? And can I deny that there's another possibility that I could live, right? Okay, and I think this is Peterson saying, clean your room first.
Right.
Right. Like we have this sense, like sneaking suspicion that the world is not the way the world ought to be, the way it was intended to be, the way our moral judgments, as you frame it, tell us it should be, all of that. But it's the world, yeah, and it's Jim too. Okay, right? You see that? And before I go making judgments about this world being below the quality that we expect from God, why is Jim below the quality that my own internal sense tells me I could be? Right?
Why am I below the quality? Why do I fail my own expectations?
Why do I fail my own expectations? And like, what is my participation in this? Before I go and say the world is a fallen mess, the world is terrible, the world is below what God would be, well, I'm connected to that. So why the hell am I so bad? And can I really say that I have no role in how bad I am? And then by extension, the world is? No one can say that, right? And I really think this is what Peterson is doing when he says, clean your room first.
Right. Yeah. Oh, one second. This reminds me of something.
Excellent. This is great. We've got an object lesson coming here on the Pathfinder show. This is unplanned, gentle listeners.
Yeah. Well, just what you said, this sits across from me down here, right? And it's just a great quote. I think it ties into exactly your thoughts. It says, "But however much concerned I was at the misery in the world, I never let myself get lost in broodings over it. I always held firmly to the thought that each of us can do a little to bring some portion of it to an end."
Right.
And that's where you end up with the problem of evil. You can do all the logic chopping you want, but at the end of the day, what are you doing about it?
And it doesn't mean what are you doing about it by
globally.
Yeah, by like burning down a city, maybe, okay, or storming a capital, okay, whatever, right? Okay, whatever, right? Because like Peterson said, it's the same problem either way. Because what you're doing is you're taking the responsibility for the evil in the world and you're loading it on someone else, something else, a structure, a president, whatever, right? And I think what Peterson's saying, I think what Dostoevsky is saying, in my view, Jesus Christ is saying, is the problem is first and foremost you. Right. Or at least that's the only thing in my grasp. And it's the only way I can deal with evil that doesn't make me a maniacal ass, right? Is to start with me.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. That's where we're going to end it. That's perfect. Maybe we'll do a part 4 of this. We'll see, gentle listeners. Sorry we didn't get to interact much, but we'll do a Q&A here soon. God bless, my friends. Dr. Jim. Yep. Peace.